the chair of YLG Scotland, and I am delighted to welcome today Clare and Sian from Queen Margaret University. Before I hand over to them, I'll pop my details in the chat, and if anyone's interested in finding out more about YLG Scotland, please do feel free to get in contact. But as I say, welcome Clare and Sian, and hoping for a very interesting session, and please feel free at the end to prepare any questions for then. But in the meantime, I'll hand over. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Helen. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for having us today, everybody. We're really delighted to be here. Hopefully you can see the slide on the screen there that has the QR code on it, and for some reason mine has gone a bit funny. I can't see it properly. There we go. I'm just going to pop the link into the chat as well, but we have put our slides for today onto all my links. So if you can either use the QR code or use the link that I've just put into the chat, and you'll be able to see today's slides if that helps you with following along. On that, all my links link, you'll actually see some other presentations that we've done and some other resources that we have prepared as well, all in one handy place. So you can have a wee look at those if that's helpful. So just to start off by introducing ourselves, Sian and I have been working together at Queen Margaret University for a number of years now, but we've been focusing on anti-ableism for about the last 6 years. So my name is Dr. Clare Uytman. I'm a senior lecturer in psychology at Queen Margaret University, and just as an audio description of myself, I have short dark hair, I'm wearing glasses and a blue and white stripy t-shirt, and I'm just going to pass over to Sian to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Sian Jones. I'm also a senior lecturer in education. I have cerebral palsy, and you won't be able to tell that because I'm sat down at the minute, and I am autistic. Today I am wearing a pink floral top, and I have my hair in a black plait, and I have books in my earrings. I use she, her pronouns.
Thank you so much, Sian. Sian always has the most appropriate earrings, and I'm always jealous of her earrings. For some reason, my slides are really not playing. They're not playing today. On my side, I can't see it properly, but on your side, you can, so I think that's okay. So just to give us a little bit of an introduction before we start, we would just like to promote a safe space within our webinar, just making sure that everybody feels comfortable and confident in what we're sharing with each other today. So we just ask before we begin that we think about respecting the confidentiality of the room. We will be sharing lived experience and living experience as we go through today, and there may be some discussions that people would prefer to keep in the room, so please do take the learning away with you today, but think about respecting the confidentiality of any stories that are shared. We look for compassionate communication, so we're really respecting everybody's identities, names and pronouns, and the information about themselves that they share. We are all learning on this journey through anti-ableism, and that includes Sian and I. You know, we really think quite carefully about the journey that we're on as we try and think about anti-ableism. So we are trying to create a space here for everybody to listen and learn together, to be confident in asking questions and taking an interest in the topic. But that might come with sitting with a little bit of discomfort, because it is a little bit of it can often be a challenging topic for us as we discuss different aspects of ableism at play. So as part of that, also committing to our own self-care. If you are finding some of the topic a little bit challenging, please do take the time to make the space as comfortable for yourself as you need to. We will be asking for some interaction as we go through today, and we're happy for you to use the chat to do that, or to turn on your microphones and speak to us, whichever way makes you feel most comfortable. And Kirsten is going to be recording the session for us today, so we're going to have the recording on throughout the session, but we will stop the recording right at the end when we have our Q&A and discussion. So if that is an issue for you, please do just use the chat rather than speaking, but we will be using the recording as we go through. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Sian, who's going to take us through some of the beginnings of our discussion about disability and ableism. Sian, do you want to take control, or do you need me to move on for you?
I will take control. I will try to take control and we'll see what happens.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start with some of the not so nice stuff, and we're moving towards a space where we can think about what we can do about it. So we'll start by thinking about disability-based discrimination and what motivates us to do this kind of work in the first place, and what might motivate you to do this kind of work in the first place. So we know we've got a sizable proportion of people in the UK who are disabled. We know that that number is rising, and we know that that accounts for about 11% of UK school children who will be, according to the government's definition of somebody who's disabled, they will be disabled. Higher again is the number of students who have additional support needs, but there's not necessarily that one-to-one correlation between who has an additional support needs and who is disabled. And Claire and I think very much about disability and disability identities rather than about additional support needs, recognizing that there is an overlap, but not a one-to-one correspondence. We know that bias-based discrimination is prevalent, not just globally, but within the UK, and that is also rising, both among adults and among children. We can see this in the statistics, we can see this in the number of disability-motivated hate crimes that are reported to the police going up year on year. And what might be more worrying than that is that a lot of children will sit through school right from primary to high school, like I did, and they'll go through it, but they won't report it. So the numbers that we have are actually probably a poor reflection of what's going on out there. So disability hate crime, that nasty, deliberate act of hate towards somebody else, is only part of what we're talking about when we're talking about ableism. So it's a very overt, very nasty form of ableism. It's easy to recognize, it's easy to see. But ableism we see as much bigger than that. We see ableism as a structural property of society, and it's about the way that we socially construct, or the way that we judge people's bodies and people's minds, and how we judge them grounded in what we might see as normal or abnormal, what we might see as productive and not productive, desirable, fit, unfit, and non-desirable. So if we take all of those things together, what we can see very quickly is that ableism is related very closely to misogyny, it's related to racism, it's related to notions of imperialism, because it allows people to define their value and other people's values according to who is productive, who is beautiful, who is fit, who is healthy, who looks good. If you have ever felt, as someone who is working in a profession, that you are not doing enough and you are not productive enough, that is a manifestation of ableism at work. Because ableism is that thing that tells you you have to be productive in order to be valuable, part of it. So anybody can experience ableism. You don't have to be disabled in order to experience it. What we want to do through our work is to think about how we counteract that narrative that you have to present in a certain way, you have to behave in a certain way, you have to be productive in a certain way, and how we can do something about that that says, no, what about thinking around it this way? And a lot of scholars, ourselves included, use the phrase anti-ableism to think about the ways in which we can counter this notion that disabled people are lesser than. So part of being anti-ableist is about thinking about those prejudiced narratives and that deliberate meanness and bullying, and challenging that, reducing that prejudice. And part of it is about increasing accessibility and thinking and challenging our concept of what is normal and what is okay and what is not. But it's also about communicating with disabled people and working in community with disabled people. It's thinking about disability as this structural inequality, as this rights-based issue, and thinking about who has access to our education systems, who they were built for, who has access to our society and who it was built for, and who doesn't have that equitable access. So when we're thinking about anti-ableism, we're thinking about human rights and we're thinking about equalities. Legislatively, and that is a really hard word to say, legislatively, we are pushing on a very open door, although this was the poster that greeted me when I came to interview at QMU. It reads "The Stairway to Success is over here," and it's a poster that's on the lifts. So even that subtle kind of message is saying we need to move to be productive, and it's forgetting that people might need to use the lift. And a lot of ableism is about forgetting that disabled people exist. So legislatively, we're pushing on an open door. There's disability equality duty guidance that will tell you how you have to make your libraries nice and accessible for disabled people. That's long since, that's from 95 DDA, that legislation came about. But there's also the 2015 World Education Forum Vision for 2030, which is about reducing barriers. There's a national framework for inclusion, which I don't have time, you'll be glad to know, to bore you with today. And there's the inclusion, wellbeing and professional learning framework. And all of this tells us that we need to be anti-ableist. The problem with this is that we are pushing against internal values and external values that tell us that we need to be ableist in order to succeed. We know that in teachers, in the teaching profession, there's not a lot of disabled teachers. We know this from some surveys, because most surveys don't even bother asking about disability identity. So 2024, 2023, they kind of forgot to ask who was disabled and who wasn't. And there's a similar lack of data concerning support staff, professional services staff, yourselves. So we don't know who is disabled and how many people are disabled, but we know that there are very, very few of them from the survey data that we do have, because data was started collecting this year from ITE students in Scotland, which are showing at less than 1%. Despite all of the legislation I just named, in Scotland, disability isn't anywhere on the school curriculum. It is on the school curriculum in Wales. There's reference to windows and mirrors, which we'll talk about later. That's from 2022 when they refreshed their curriculum. It isn't anywhere on the school curriculum in Scotland, and neither is it on the curriculum from Northern Ireland. So you don't have to do this if you are a teacher. It's not in your curriculum guidance, but it is part of a broader picture. Back to Clare.
Thanks, Sian. Excuse me. So one of the things that we've been doing, sorry, I don't know what's going on with this. I can't see it properly. It keeps going tiny. There we go. It keeps zooming in really far on my slide and not on yours. I don't know why. So one of the things we've been doing over the last 5-6 years is research into what do we need to do here. We became aware when we first started doing work on this that there wasn't this representation of disability within the curriculum, and we needed to figure out what we could do to try and embed that more fully and in a practical way, in a way that would be useful to teachers and educators. We've been developing a whole host of resources for teachers and for use in education establishments, which we'll come to later on. But one of the things we wanted to just highlight is the research findings that we have had, which really gives us an insight into the challenges and the issues that are faced within education here. We did a series of focus groups, which which featured educators, it featured disabled adults, parents of disabled children, and a whole other raft of different questionnaire-based research. And in those studies, we found that overwhelmingly educators were saying they felt undertrained and lacked confidence in talking about disability and understanding disability and in translating that into their practice. The resources that we gave them, they reported were really valuable for them using within the classroom, and that they themselves actually increased educator confidence in teaching about disability. We found that doing some training sessions really boosted the confidence, and really importantly, it was about giving the teachers, the educators, the language that they needed to properly discuss disability. One of the things that we were kind of hearing time and again was just not having that language and not being confident and comfortable, and being really worried about getting it wrong. There was lots of worrying about getting it wrong, and so therefore just not approaching it at all. And what we are trying to do here is to try and encourage people to think about that language and think about the different ways that that language can be embedded through other resources, such as the books that they have in the school and the different resources they have available to them. So one of the things we're really keen on is thinking about the words that we're using, and even using the word disability. We have lots of, even when we started doing different sessions with educators, using the word disabled almost felt like a bad word. And this is not exclusive to the world of education. This is felt time and time again, that people are actually worried about using that word disabled. And as you can see from this little quote here, Watson discusses this in terms of using the word disabled and often the discourse that it can create and has been historically used to create the idea of it being a tragedy, of it setting up the image of somebody who's in need of sympathy or somebody who's in need of remediation and cure, and actually thinking about privileging able-bodied over disabled people. And that leads us on to thinking about the way that we understand disability and the models that we're using to think about disability, and where that narrative of disabled as a bad word is coming from, and how we can challenge that actively. And if we go straight to one of our favourite authors, Elle McNichol, in her book Keedy, Elle McNichol is a fantastic author and writes stories from neurodivergent perspectives of our main characters. And this little quote here from Keedy, which talks about the idea of just not using this word disabled. And you know, in this conversation that these two girls are having, they say, do you know what they call kids like us in England? She asks me. I can imagine, I say, but tell me. Send. Send? Yeah. Is it short for something? No, it's special educational needs and disabilities. Why can't they just say disabled? Well, maybe it's because they want to send us away, Bonnie finally says quietly. And I think that sense that is given in this book, in Keedy, is this idea that they are ashamed of the needs of these disabled children, and trying to avoid even thinking about them as a disabled group, rather than tackling the barriers and challenges that they're facing. So we're going to take you through just now some of the different ways that we might understand and tackle these issues. Sian, I'll pass back to you.
Okay, so I've got control back. So we're going to talk about how we do anti-ableism through books and through representation. Before we do that, let's bring everybody to the same page in the way that we are understanding disability. So I've already talked about it as a human rights issue and a structural issue. But how did I get there? Well, I got there, first of all, from moving away from conceiving of disability as something special and as a need and as a deficit. So the medical model of disability, which has been around for a very long time, will cast disability as any and all of those things, will cast it as some kind of impairment. And whatever disables you is what impairs you, and there's that one-to-one relationship between the two. From the 1970s forward, what we see is more emancipatory movements within disabled communities and the emergence of something called the social model of disability. And the social model of disability says, yes, our bodies and minds, or bodies or minds, may be impaired in some way, they may be different in some way, but that's not the disability. The disabling bit is the bit where there are barriers. It's the bit where there are no ramps. It's the bit where there are no BSL interpreters. It's the bit where you forgot that we existed and you didn't build a society that included us. So the social model of disability looks at people's attitudes and their environments as the things that disable and separates that from the person. So the person isn't the problem anymore. The medical impairment isn't the problem anymore. What the problem is the environment and attitudes. If we go all the way forward to nowadays and the early 2000s, we start to see something called the affirmative model of disability appearing, and it appears in various guises across the literature. And that talks about human rights. It talks about equalities. It talks about celebrating disabled people's identities, not as something that is lesser, not necessarily as something that is different, just as something that is, just as part of the diversity of human identity. Like we have people with different ethnicities, different genders, and so on and so on. So putting it into that frame. So if we put disability into that frame, so have many authors that have gone through space and time. If you read when you were wee, you might have read books like The Secret Garden, you might have read Peter Pan, you might have read Christmas Carol, you might have read What Katie Did. Mostly Victorian authors, and Victorian authors used to see disability in line with that medical model, but it was more than the medical model. It was about disability as some kind of tragedy, something that was very wrong and that reflected a moral stain on your character. So Katie learns to be good in What Katie Did, and as a result of learning to be good, miraculously she can walk. The same kind of story occurs in Clara, in Heidi, Colin in The Secret Garden. It's that tragedy arc. So if we're thinking about mirrors and windows and where disabled people are reflected, one of the things to be very aware of is when they're being presented with that tragedy arc. The tragedy arc has morphed since the Victorian era. And it's morphed in interesting ways. So in the canon now, as I understand it, having been out of mainstream education for a wee while in schools, but in the canon, I see a lot of the children I work with having the book Wonder. And I don't like the fact that Wonder is in the canon, and neither do several of my colleagues in the disability community, because it's still representing disability as a deficit. It's still saying that there's something different, very different with Augie. And it's still saying, it's giving an education narrative as well. We'll talk about that. So it's saying that Augie is the one that needs to actually educate other people, and he's got to befriend his bullies, and he's got to do something about it. So it sets quite a low bar in terms of what we might expect and celebrate about disabled people. And it puts them as the object of education. It also introduces the concept of bullying to children who might have gone through their entire education without being bullied. And it's cast them as the potential targets of bullying, which might be news to some disabled people. We hope it's news to them. Am I passing back? Am I going through? Am I keeping going? Keeping going. Okay, so in terms of book-based representation, then you might know about the Excluded Voices report. If you don't, it's free to access, and it's a really good survey that's done. It's a publishing survey, so it's done of authors and books that have been published within the past year, usually. And they now have a section of neurodivergent and disability representation in books, and it's categorized by early, middle, and higher level reading. And it looks at protagonists, and it looks at the narrative that goes alongside disability. It also looks at the authorship. So one of the things that we're quite keen on is that disability is represented, at least in part, by people who are disabled in the authorship, because our experiences are quite authentic, and they should be there in the literature. So it also looks at own voice creators, and it looks at the ways in which disability is presented. But you can see there from those stats that 5.9% of titles are featuring disabled characters, and only two titles that were published in 2023-24 had neurodivergent characters from the same British voice creator. Okay, so it's a British publishing survey, I should have said as well. There's also some strange stuff that goes on in these stories. We have characters in wheelchairs who can suddenly climb stairs because the author's forgotten that they can't. So there's quite an interesting read to go through that. So what are we thinking about when we're thinking about helpful mirrors and windows? We're thinking about positive representation. We're thinking about celebrating disabled children for who they are without them having to educate. Because we know from oodles of psychology literature, as I think we've told you we're psychologists, that builds positive attitudes and it builds positive self-esteem. So some of our favourites are there, Out of My Mind, E.D. Eckhart, What Happened to You, and we'll talk about those later if you'd like us to. The other thing to be aware of is cracked glass. And there is still some cracked glass about. Greg James was recreating the Twits and Roald Dahl's The Twits, and thinking about how they were going to represent them on screen, and thought it'd be really nice to make them as disabled as possible by having a disgusting glass eye. And that narrative around disability being the villain is something else you might be able to recollect from your childhood, if Peter Pan ever came your way. Equally, if you or any of your family members are involved in the Marvel universe, think about who the villain is in those universes as well. So
I'm taking it back.
You're taking back. Excellent.
I'm taking it back. And I'm going to move this on. Yeah, so
go for it.
Thank you, Sian. As Sian's been saying there, we're thinking about what are helpful and unhelpful mirrors and windows, and where one of the things we'd like to draw your attention to here are some of those unhelpful disability tropes that we often see. And at the bottom of this slide here, I'll pop this link into the chat as well. I've also put that Inclusive Voices report that Sian was just talking about into the chat that you can also have a look at. There are two very important and very helpful disabled authors, Lucy and James Catchpole, and they have a really brilliant blog which talks a lot about this idea of helpful and unhelpful representation in children's literature. I'm sure you'll have heard of Lucy and James Catchpole. So I just want to kind of give a summary of some of the things that they talk about in terms of unhelpful disability tropes. One of the things Sian's mentioned already is the kind of education element here, where it's up to the disabled character to answer the questions, to give those answers to the non-disabled onlookers as though they have a right to know information about them. And the book that James Catchpole has written, What Happened to You, very much centres on this idea that the main character in that book is very much the centre of the question, what happened to you, what happened to you, and feeling like they are a living teachable moment. So trying to find books which avoid this. Also having a non-disabled central character who explains the disabled character to the reader. And as Sian was saying a moment ago about that excluded voices report, actually where we don't see the disabled person as being the main character, they can be a side character, but there's a non-disabled character who does the explaining for them. And there are a couple of examples of that here on the screen. So for example, something like my sister has autism, which really isn't ideal. It's not telling the story from the disabled character's perspective and takes away their voice. And the Catchpole blog asks us to imagine if you were talking about characters of different races, you can see where that would be really problematic. And we quite often use that analogy when we're talking about ableism, and people are finding it quite challenging to think about ableism, because it is quite, unfortunately, quite a deep-seated societal norm for us to be ableist, as Sian has mentioned earlier. And when you link it across to racism, if something that you say, if you replace the word disabled with the word black and it was racist, it is almost certainly also ableist. And the Catchpoles really ask us to think about that when we're looking at these tropes. Children being bullied for their disability, who then have to prove the bullies wrong and befriend them, as happens in Wonder, that idea of having to overcome that bullying and kind of show them, again, that it shouldn't be on the child to do that conversion, to stop somebody else bullying them. But often that is the trope that is used. Or using disabled characters for comic effect. So for example, somebody who is falling over, or somebody who can't hear what's being said and become the butt of the joke because they can't pick it up. I watched a video online the other day which actually just made me want to throw my laptop out the window, which was essentially a whole bus full of a sports team, a university sports team, who were doing on the bus karaoke and trying to get their deaf colleague to stand up trying to do the karaoke and having to come in at exactly the right point in the song, and everybody else laughing because they weren't able to do it. And it just made me so angry and annoyed that they kind of made this the butt of the joke. So again, that's something that we need to think about. Excuse me, I have a real frog in my throat today. Something that we see a lot is the inspiration porn. It's the inspirational stories. The disabled character coming very much packaged up with that idea of never giving up. You know, if they can be this resilient, then so can you. And you know, actually, where we think about a lot of the social model and the affirmative model message is that actually we need to move away from this. Disabled people are not there to inspire non-disabled people. We need to also think about all the other day-to-day things that they can't do, or that they have their own challenges with. Not every disabled person is going to become a Paralympian. We need to think about this inspirational message. The use of disability as a surprise punchline, as a surprise element. So revealing the character's disability, and it becomes a disabled person who suddenly is doing something that you wouldn't have expected them to be able to do. Almost kind of trying to say, look, this person is just the same as you and I, but actually the effect on it is quite dehumanizing, and really needing to think about kind of setting the bar higher than just using disability as a surprise element. The image here of the little boy holding the dog is an example of that. This is from a short film called The Present, where the boy is given a dog who has a missing limb. And he treats the dog very badly, and he's quite upset with the fact he's been given this dog. But then in the end, he comes round to the fact that he does want the dog, and he goes out to play with the dog. And when he stands up, we realise that he also has a limb difference. And it's kind of that, oh, wow, shock moment. Again, trying to avoid that. Books that catalogue disabled people by their diagnosis. There are lots of really good collected biographies of disabled people which celebrate that person. So books such as I Am Not a Label, which is a really good collection of biographies. But when they start not with the individual, but with the diagnosis. It just becomes more like a medical textbook. It becomes more like a kind of list of disabilities rather than actually thinking about the individuals themselves. Now, the last two are hopefully ones that we wouldn't see very often, but unfortunately we do see them. Parents being shown to be grieving the birth of a disabled child, or to be upset or be disappointed at the birth of a disabled child, where we recognise that, you know, not all births are full of uncomplicated joy, but this is the case for many pregnancies. And what the catchpoles are pointing out is that they only ever see this when there's a disability involved. And for a disabled child who's never considered that there might have been any trauma involved in their birth, that is really quite a horrible thing to see in a book. So thinking about moving away from anything like that. And finally, excuse me, disabled children being rejected or discriminated against by grown-ups. So while this might be something that they face, we don't really want to see this in a book. As Sian said earlier, if children haven't conceived that this might happen to them, they haven't conceived that they might be bullied, they might have conceived that they might be rejected, this is going to be really unnecessary and quite painful. What's interesting is we do see that happen in Out of My Mind, where Melody, the main character there, is discriminated against by a teacher. But what's interesting is how they deal with that, and how Melody deals with it, and how it's tackled in a really kind of affirming way. So just to take a little break from you listening to us talking for a minute, we just thought we might have a couple of minutes to ask you to put into the chat here if there are any books that you've seen that feature what you would consider to be good disability representation, or actually some representation that you might have found to be a little bit difficult or challenging. How would you maybe describe or analyse the way that that disability has been represented? If anyone has any suggestions, you can pop them into the chat, or if you feel comfortable, you could just pop your microphone on and let us know. But if you have any suggestions at all, or that you'd like to share, I'll go through a couple of the books that we have on the screen here that you might be interested in and you may or may not have heard of. But just while we're doing that, I'll just wait and see if anyone has anything they want to add. So we've already spoke about Elle McNichol and The Kind of Spark and the rest of her series of books. She's got such a wide range of books now. The Kind of Spark, and then Keedy, which was a prequel to the Kind of Spark series. That is really it's a great series to look at. Kirsten's just said the fact that you're struggling to come up with a positive example feels telling. Yes, I would suggest that. A new one that we discovered actually via the Scottish Book Trust was Rune, which is a graphic novel and has some really good representation in that. Yeah, Ruth, you've already found Rune, and I was really pleased to find something that was a graphic novel as well, because I know my daughter's 11 and my sons, when they were that age, graphic novels were so brilliant and they really loved seeing them. So that's a nice find. When I See Blue is about a boy who has OCD, and it kind of explains it from his perspective. It's a really nice book. We love Rosie Jones. We love Edie Eckhart. Rosie Jones has cerebral palsy and has created the Edie Eckhart series. She is currently working on her third one of these. Sian and I actually went to see her earlier in the year and asked her, when is the next Edie Eckhart book coming out? And she said she is currently working on the third one and it will be coming out in the summer. But Edie Eckhart is a brilliant book because it's all from Edie's perspective. It's about the kind of realities of being a teenage girl, as well as having cerebral palsy and all of the different things that are tied up in that. It also has some lovely LGBT representation in there as well. It also talks about different family setups. It's fantastic. I think 2 years ago, one of the World Book Day books was a mini Edie Eckhart, so that's worth looking up. El Defo is a great book. Thank you for that suggestion. It's really good. Also a nice comic, graphic novel comic book. And the last one on the slide here is the Black Book of Colours, which is written entirely in black and white with raised pictures and braille throughout. So it gives a description of how a blind child describes what they are seeing and how they experience things that they're seeing. So it's a nice book to look at as well. Although Sian and I were talking about this last week, where apparently there has been some feedback that the braille isn't as readable by a braille user as they would like it to be, but it is still a nice book to have. Checkmates by Stuart Foster is one that I have not heard of. I always like these discussions because we find things we haven't seen. And Finding Phoebe, that's another one I haven't heard of yet either. And The Boy Who Loves to Lick the Wind. There's another one I haven't heard of. So these are, Sian, have you heard of any of those ones? We'll need to add those into our library. If you think of any as we're going through, please feel free to add them in, and we'll also come back to this discussion near the end. But I'm just going to move on now just to taking you through the resources that we have developed, because they might be useful for you to go and have a look at, particularly our resource directory, which I think you might find useful. My silly screen is doing this again. Go back, come on. Oh, I'll just have to, I hope I know what I'm talking about. So what I've got on the screen here is just a screenshot of the front of our website, the QMU Toy Box Diversity Lab, and you can access it via the QR code that's on there as well. Sian, could you pop the link to that into the chat just while I'm talking? That'd be really helpful. So on there, you'll see a whole series of resources for you to use. You'll see links to webinars that we've done. You'll also see our the chatty pack that we've created. We have a series of video guides because one of the things that our research told us was that educators needed some context and needed that background information. So we've created some short videos which just go through some of the things we're talking about today, but in greater detail. So things like thinking about the different models of disability, the different ways that we might think about embedding that into our practice. So we've got video guides there, and we also have our searchable resource directory. And on the resource directory, we have a series of books and other resources that you might find useful. And we've categorized these so you can search through them. You can look for different, so for example, you might look for different reading ages or different topics. And within there, you'll see what I have on the screen here, which is a little snippet of what it looks like. A little review which talks about how it deals with disability, how the social model is presented there, and we also have reviews of real readers. So we have a little army of small children that we give books to and get them to give us reviews of them. So we've tried where we can to put reviews either from our own student researchers or from essentially my children and all her friends who do reviews for us. So you'll be able to look at that if that's helpful. Another thing that we have on the website is this self-audit. And this is where we're just really encouraging people as you're starting to think about embedding anti-ableism and creating more disability affirming spaces, is just to do a little bit of an audit of what you already have. A lot of the time, people don't realise there's a lack until they go looking for it. And so this audit is really just a way of us trying to highlight maybe some of the spaces where there might be a lack of representation and might just guide you into the direction of where you might be able to make some real actionable changes. The other thing we've created is this the Toy Box Tales Chatty Pack. So the Chatty Pack is a series of activities and resources that can be used in the classes and lots of different education settings. You'll see from the slide here, it has a series of different activities that can be done in the class, some different talking points, giving you some language to use alongside it. So it's not just kind of here's the activity, off you go. There's lots of support there as well. And in addition to that, everything within the Chatty Pack, all of our activities and all of our classroom actions are mapped onto the curriculum for excellence. Again, this was something that was really important from our research, that teachers wanted to be able to use it. And importantly for us, it's about moving it away from this being disability as a topic that's just about PSE, or it can just come out during Disability Awareness Week and then we can pop it away again. By mapping this, we can show that actually you can embed these resources right the way through the curriculum. So we can show how it's mapped to literacy, to numeracy, to science, all sorts of different ways that this thing can be connected. I'm going to pass on to Sian now, who's going to take you through an example of where we've designed a teaching resource that can be used that's connected to one of these books.
Well, thank you, Claire. So taking back control, one of the things that we want to do is not to say, okay, all of these mirrors and windows are unhelpful, let's get rid of them, but actually think critically with learners, even very young learners, about what those mirrors and windows are telling us. So I use the concept of critical literacy, which I borrowed from my education colleagues. And one of the books that I looked at with my education colleagues was a book called Splash by Clare Cashmore, who is a Paralympian. And one of the things that we thought we'd do with Splash was to present it to some primary 7 learners and to think about what disability looks like in the book Splash. So we had learning intentions around opinions of picture books, and around respect and how we justify our opinions, which are borrowed from the national curriculum. Because what we're finding, the feedback we were getting from educators more and more was that it's all very well finding these books, but they need resources that go along with them as well, which is fair enough. Now, one of the things that we do know about disability is that on the rare occasion it may be talked about, it's going to be talked about when the Paralympics and the Olympics are on. But this is a resource that you can use regardless of whether the Paralympics or the Olympics are about. But it looks at the way in which disability is discursively constructed when the Olympics and the Paralympics are being advertised to us. So we would invite some primary 7 learners to look at trailers for the Olympics and trailers for the Paralympics. I'm not going to play them, but if you have grabbed the slides, you will be able to play the trailers from the slides. So we've got the Olympics and the way that sport is characterized there. And we ask children to contrast that with what they're noticing about the advert for the Paralympics before they have to go on and create their own more inclusive trailer for the Paralympics. So they're doing things like discussing what has been noticed in the Paralympics, how effective the trailer is, and what about the media coverage, and linking that back to the Splash book. We bring the book into the classroom and we look at the blurb and look at what the book might be about and look at whether they notice what is going on that front cover and whether they actually notice the limb difference. And that can be quite telling. And the questions that we always use around disability is not what is wrong or what is the problem, but what's happening here or what do you notice about it. And the blurb actually gives no indication of the disability. So we look at that and then we open up the conversation and then come back to Splash to have a think about it. So that's one of the resources. It's available on our website, along with some other resources that we've created and that other people have created as well. And I'm happy to go into that a bit more detail, but I'm very aware of the time. So I think this is the point where it might be sensible to open the floor to discussion and put the floor back over to Helen and to you.